In today's episode of Dave's Food Journey, we'll be traveling from Shin-Yokohama to Akashi, a port city located in Hyogo Prefecture, where we'll enjoy tons of fresh seafood, akashiyaki, which are the original version of the more well-known takoyaki, a delicious hotel breakfast with local specialties, the biggest futomaki I've ever seen, and much more. So get ready, because our food journey in Akashi starts right now. We arrived at Nishi-Akashi Station. Nishi means west, and this is where we'll be staying. It's only a 4-minute train ride from Nishi-Akashi to the more populated Akashi Station. Our hotel was literally right across from the station, which was extremely convenient. After a quick check-in at the hotel and dropping off our luggage, we headed to Akashi. Directly across from the station is Uo No Tana, which translates to the fish shelf. A popular shopping street with more than 100 vendors and 400 years of history. Akashi is known as the city of time and seafood, and is well known for octopus in particular. It seemed like we had arrived a little bit late to the city of time, since it was later in the afternoon and many shops and vendors were already closed, but there was still plenty of seafood around. Our first stop was Sushizaimon, which despite the name was more of a laid-back izakaya. We started off with a tuna sashimi platter, which came with 3 beautiful slices each of Akami, Chutoro, and Otoro. With any sort of platter like this, it's always best to start with the lean and work your way up to the fatty pieces. As expected, the Akami was lean and tender with a very mild flavor that paired perfectly with wasabi and soy sauce. Although at first glance the Chutoro looked quite similar to the Akami, it didn't have any of the visible muscle fibers, which resulted in a much more rich and melt-in-your-mouth texture. Chutoro is my favorite of the 3 cuts, and this one was spectacular, very rich and very tender. And finally, the Otoro was as premium as it gets. The intramuscular marbling basically looked the same as A5 Wagyu, and you could see the fat melting at room temperature. As soon as you chewed it, your mouth was coated in the most rich, delicious flavor. This tuna platter also cost like $8, so that made it taste even better. In fact, it was so good we ordered a second platter of sashimi right away. And I have to say the fish quality at this restaurant is just about as good as it gets in Japan. We were extremely impressed. Octopus, which is usually chewy when cut this thick, had a slightly cartilagey initial texture, but was overall tender with a slightly sweet and delicious seafood flavor. It was excellent. The yellowtail was rich and flavorful. The torched herring was smoky and tender, and this Chutoro, daikon, and shiso leaf combo was outstanding. Next up were 2 beautiful ikura gunkan, with some of the brightest and largest salmon roe I've ever seen. Usually ikura is more of an orange-red and darker, but these were almost fluorescent orange. They had their characteristic salty, slightly sweet, and pleasantly fishy flavor. These ones were slightly on the salty side, but for 200 yen each, I will never complain, since they're at least 3 times the price in Canada. The next dish were tempura oysters, which are pretty rare to see compared to the panko-crusted katsu version. And as you can see from my reaction, These were 10 out of 10 delicious.
Wow.
Through the way they prepared this oyster, there was no liquid or jelly-like textures. It was like a light but super rich oyster pate coated in an even lighter and perfectly crispy tempura batter. The oysters at this restaurant were some of the most flavorful, richest, and creamiest I've ever had. We ordered some shishito peppers just to have some vegetables and something other than seafood, but truthfully, even though there was a lot of seafood and much of it was rich, it never felt overwhelming. We moved on to our oyster sashimi, which came in a dish with a shiso leaf, ponzu sauce, daikon grated with chili, green onions, and lemon. These were the same oysters as the tempura version, but when they left it raw, it tasted much fresher and lighter, especially when combined with the citrusy ponzu sauce. They don't develop the same solid rich taste and texture as when they were cooked, but they were equally delicious in their own way. The last bite with shiso was incredible. The final dish was something I just had to try because they cost like 80 cents, and on the tablet they just looked like fish bones. And it turns out it's because they were fish bones that were fried until they became edible. They were coated in a good amount of salt, and the fried fish flavor was delicious, but they were definitely quite hard, but overall a great snack with a cold beer. This was a spectacular seafood meal with extremely reasonable prices, and I will highly recommend Sushizaimon to anyone who visits Akashi. The next morning we woke up bright and early so we could be the first ones at the hotel breakfast buffet. It had a pretty nice selection with dishes such as Octopus Rice, lots of pickles and side dishes, a grilled mackerel station, simmered beef and vegetables, akashiaki, loaded curry, bacon and scrambled eggs, chicken, ham, and quiche, tempura, a salad bar, your usual miso soup and rice, natto and different forms of seaweed. There were also assorted breads, pastries, cereals, drinks, and for dessert, there was yogurt, fruits, and jellies. It was definitely a very nice selection. Since we arrived right at opening, the tempura was still very fresh, and the maitake mushroom tempura was excellent. A light, crispy, and salty exterior with a pleasantly chewy and flavorful mushroom inside. It's not very common to have tempura for breakfast, and especially not a premium ingredient like maitake mushroom, so this was a real treat. As previously mentioned, akashiyaki are the original form of takoyaki. They have a higher ratio of egg to flour in the batter, so they're softer and richer when compared to the crispier and more firm takoyaki. They are also served with a dashi broth instead of mayonnaise and other toppings. They have a much more mild and comforting flavor. These ones weren't bad, but they weren't freshly made, and that's how you really want to eat takoyaki or akashiyaki.
Did you get some?
The braised beef was extremely tender, flavorful, and rich. Another surprise from the tempura came when I bit into tempura bamboo, which was a first for me. The same delicious light and crispy shell with a firm piece of bamboo, which has its distinct root-like taste and texture. Bamboo was actually in about 5 to 6 different dishes on this buffet, which was amazing because I really enjoy its unique taste and texture. The curry, which also contained bamboo, had the same rich, tender, and fatty beef, but this time it was in an extremely aromatic, savory, and robust curry. The double grilled mackerel was unique, but definitely on the dry side. I think it would have been better if I just skipped the grilling and ate it at room temperature, but I really enjoy mackerel, so it was still pretty good nonetheless. And everything went together well with the octopus rice. It's not a strong flavor, but the octopus adds a little bit of seafoody flavor along with extra umami. This was a very well prepared breakfast buffet with a very nice selection. I'll give it a solid 8 out of 10 as far as breakfast buffets go. Since we arrived earlier, we were able to see more vendors selling fresh fish for very reasonable prices. Actually, I couldn't believe how cheap some of them were. $4 for a whole cutlass fish was crazy. And after some browsing, we stopped in at Tamagoyaki Taco Iso, the most popular and well-known Akashiyaki restaurant. Just some quick history. Akashiyaki, locally known as tamagoyaki, were originally invented as a way to use up a huge surplus of egg yolks left over by the decorative coral bead industry, which only used the whites. The yolks were mixed with flour and octopus, which were also in abundance, and that's how akashiyaki was created. The inside of the restaurant was relatively small, maybe seating for about 15, with most of it being at a counter so you could watch the cooking. Unfortunately, I got the single corner seat available, which was probably the only one where you couldn't see anything being prepared. We ordered the recommended akashiyaki platter, which came with 8 pieces, half octopus and half eel, and they were served with some hot dashi broth again. I apologize for the especially bad camera work in this restaurant. The seats were very narrow, and again, I was literally on the corner, so there was nowhere I could set my camera down without other people being in the frame and feel like I would be imposing on them. The texture was very soft and still quite liquidy in the center, with a couple small pieces of octopus. It had a very mild egg flavor that was complemented nicely by the mild dashi broth. The Japanese parsley added a fresh fragrance and flavor. Compared to takoyaki, it was much softer and a much more mild, comforting flavor. The eel version had a stronger fish flavor, not in a bad way, but I definitely preferred the pleasantly chewy texture contrast of the octopus version better. The eel also had a surprising amount of bones, which didn't enhance the experience. Just like with takoyaki, you can paint on some Japanese barbecue sauce, which adds a bold, sweet, savory, and zesty flavor. I truly enjoyed the akashiyaki, but they were a little bit on the plain side, and the texture was a little too soft and mushy for me. We also ordered some seared scallops and spinach with a butter soy sauce. The scallops were lightly seared, very flavorful, and tender. The spinach was fresh and crisp, and everything was coated in a caramelized butter soy sauce that was savory, rich, and absolutely delicious. It was a great experience to try the original akashiyaki at the most popular shop. And after that light snack, we headed towards Akashi Castle. Our next stop was a restaurant with a very straightforward name. Kaki, Tako, Izakaya, Akashi. Since Akashi is most well known for octopus, we ordered a carpaccio, which came with arugula and a tangy whole grain mustard sauce. The octopus was served raw, and it had a pleasant slight chewiness and mild seafood flavor that was enhanced by the mustard sauce. It was even better when combined with the peppery arugula. It was one of those dishes where the more you chew, the better it tastes. A very satisfying Western dish. I also ordered one of my favorite snacks, taco wasabi. Small pieces of octopus mixed with seafood, lots of crunchy keltis stems, and a huge amount of wasabi flavor. It had the usual slimy texture that I'm quite accustomed to now, and it was spicy and delicious. The last dish we ordered was a sushi tower. Plain sushi rolls topped with a tower of tuna, salmon, grated mountain yam, ikura, and tobiko. A very creative and unique presentation to say the least, but the flavor and texture were outstanding.
Wow, this looks...
The creamy grated mountain yam worked surprisingly well with the heavily seasoned, chewy sushi rice and seafood. It gave the entire sushi a surprisingly delicious and pleasant, rich and creamy texture. It may not have looked the prettiest, but this was much more delicious than I expected. I highly recommend this dish. All three dishes we tried at Oyster, Octopus, Izakaya, Akashi were excellent.
Get an extra stamp now.
For dinner, we stopped at an izakaya called Dondon. They had a surprisingly large menu, as well as a second, even more surprisingly large menu. The first dish to arrive was our otoshi, which was some lightly cooked chicken breast with onions and sesame sauce. This was the most tender chicken I've ever eaten, a great start to the meal. Some sushi arrived next, and the akami was lean and tender. The squid was dense, rich, and slightly sweet, and the popping ikura gunkin was savory, rich, and flavorful. This was excellent izakaya sushi. You never know what you're going to get when you order sushi at an izakaya, but these were all fantastic. The ikura gunkins were shockingly less than $2 Canadian each, so we ordered more right away. We actually tried to order 6 more, and they said no, but you can have 2 more. We also got some little gyoza, which were perfectly crispy on the bottom and soft on top. They were surprisingly light and extremely easy to eat. They were filled with your standard mixture of pork and cabbage. And then our futomaki roll came, which was larger than any I'd seen previously. Absolutely loaded with several different fish, cucumber, egg, and shiso leaves. Although you're always supposed to eat sushi in one bite, I'm not sure if this one was meant to be. Although there were tons of different ingredients, the flavors all blended together nicely. The fragrant nori and well-seasoned, perfectly chewy rice made for an extremely delicious and satisfying roll. And to absolutely nobody's surprise, it was also very filling. The final dish was a beef dish, which came lightly seared on the outside, but completely raw otherwise. It was served with raw garlic, sliced onions, grated chili daikon, a pepper sauce, green onions, and ponzu sauce. But handwritten menus like this are a lot harder to read for me, as well as the phone translator, so when the menu looks like this, you never truly know what you're ordering. I ordered grilled beef, and that is 100% what I received, but it looked nothing like what I was anticipating. But it looked quite delicious nonetheless, since I really enjoy dishes like this with strongly flavored ingredients, which are perfectly paired with an ice-cold beer. The steak was quite chewy, but this was one of those dishes where more and more flavor releases as you chew, and the more you chew, the better it tastes. The garlic, onion, grated daikon all had maximum pungent flavors, which complemented the rich beef taste, and the ponzu sauce added a sharp citrusy note. It was an unbelievably bold flavor profile that I truly enjoyed. We both agreed it was an excellent dinner at Dondon, and I highly recommend this izakaya to anyone visiting Akashi. The next morning, we had one more delicious breakfast at Prefort Hotel before beginning our trip to Shimonoseki in Yamaguchi Prefecture. It was a fantastic couple days in Akashi with some unbelievably delicious food. We truly enjoyed our time here. I also hope you enjoyed this food video. Please like and subscribe if you did. My food journey from Japan will continue soon. Thanks for watching.